So we're going to talk about that today, the difference between popular and peer-reviewed sources and why that's an important difference. For this paper, you're only required to use popular sources. Originally, the unit was set up to have you research peer-reviewed sources, and those are much harder to find, harder to read, more disorienting. I didn't think we had enough time to do it in the 4 weeks, especially with 2 of those weeks you being on vacation / doing finals week. So we're just going to switch over to doing popular sources. I'm going to take a look, we'll take a look together at the paper prompt that's linking everything in the unit together real quick. So the paper prompt, it's an argumentative paper. Instead of choosing your own topic, what I usually do to make things simpler, we're going with popular sources, and we're just writing on this one prompt. It's a prompt that I think stems perfectly out of MLK's letter from Birmingham jail. I like to teach that letter as an introduction to how to argue well. And I was thinking of a paper prompt that would connect straight to that paper so that you guys wouldn't have to do too much other research outside of what you're already assigned in class. So the paper prompt, it's just an argue for, against, or make up your own middle ground. Is the Black Lives Matter movement MLK's legacy or not? Is it something that he would approve of, do you think, or is it something that he would hate? That's the whole paper argument. You can choose to connect MLK to the Black Lives Matter movement and say, yes, he would approve of this, or you can choose to argue that he would disapprove of it, or you're welcome to make up your own nuanced middle ground where you think he would approve parts and not others. All up to you. The goals for the essay are here. These are the technical goals, right? Clearly conveying the issue. Represent at least 2 interlocutors. You only have to use 2 sources, and they only have to be popular sources. We're going to talk about the difference between popular and peer-reviewed today, and there's 2 videos next week that I already told you that you'll watch that show you the difference between popular and peer-reviewed sources. And these 2 interlocutors that you use, they have to disagree. So you're going to take one side, right? Say you take the side, MLK would not approve of Black Lives Matter. You need to have at least one source that agrees with you and one source that disagrees with you. You have to have one from each side of the argument. And the other part of doing that is required here. You need to prove that both of the interlocutors, both of them, are trustworthy. So you're not just setting up a straw man, right? You're not just using a crappy person who disagrees with you so that you can bowl them over. I want you to find a reputable source that disagrees with you and a reputable source that agrees with you, so you can have an actual discussion about these differences, because this is a very nuanced argument that you guys are joining into. So you're going to be, at some point in the paper, you want to prove that you're trustworthy, right? And a big part of that is going to be proving that the interlocutors you used are trustworthy. That'll take care of that. You want to be logical, so no holes in your logic. That's just something you've been held to all semester. That's what I leave comments on. And then I'm also asking you to do a move of pathos, right? So some kind of emotional move here as well, where you're going to be making some kind of emotionally connected plea between you and your reader for whatever reason. And then I want you to conclude by directly addressing MLK from Letter from Birmingham Jail. So somewhere, it doesn't have to be the conclusion, but the conclusion makes a lot of sense. I want you to quote directly from Letter from Birmingham Jail to prove why your interpretation of this question is legitimate. I want you to connect his words and the ideas that you read from him to your own paper. And then on a side note, this should be pretty easy. Create a works cited and use proper MLA works cited form. If we go back to the page here, down to week 14, next week, you also have 3 sources for how to make a works cited. It's not that hard, but I do expect you to do it the right way. It should be pretty straightforward. There's a video on how to do it, examples of how to do it, and Purdue OWL, which is Purdue's website, they have the most comprehensive breakdown of how to make a citation, and they do it really well. Cool. So that's the paper prompt that's holding everything together. This week, all you're doing is reading Letter from Birmingham Jail, which is an amazing argument. I think everyone should read it. And then you're going to do a journal and answer prompts on what the letter's doing. How is it an argument? How is it a successful argument? That's pretty much all this week. And then you're just kind of starting to think about your final paper. And you have this forum here, but pretty chill forum. Next week, you're going to do a short forum. This will take you 5 minutes, less than 5 minutes. It's just to make sure that you understand when you look over the MLA stuff and the sources stuff. It's just to make sure that you understand those concepts. I need to make sure that you understand those going into the break so that you're not scrambling last minute to figure out how to assess a source and how to make it work cited. But for next week, for your main bit of work, those are just things you're watching. For the actual work that you're going to do writing, you're going to read these 4 documents here, and you're going to do a journal in response to them where you do like a little bit of very casual research. I think it should be interesting, and it's also going to build towards your paper. Then we get into Thanksgiving week. No work, nothing at all. I don't expect anything from you on Thanksgiving. Just enjoy the time with your family. If you want to share your journals with other people, feel free to. If you want to submit your paper early because you're overachieving, feel free to. I'll give you feedback. We come back finals week. There's a reflection forum. It's just purely a reflection on the class from you. And then you'll submit your paper. And that will be due, what I believe, on either Friday or Saturday of finals week. So you have the whole week to do it. Yeah, Friday the 4th. So you'll have the whole week to finish writing that paper. So more or less you have 2 weeks, Thanksgiving break and the week back, to do your final paper. That's all that's for. So any questions about what's expected of you over the next 4 weeks now that we've kind of looked over it? Desiree, you look a little confused. Any questions?
No, sorry, it just kept kicking me out for some reason.
Oh, okay. Well, that's unpleasant. Hopefully that takes care of itself. Okay, well, so what I want to do today, which I think will end up being fun, it'll be a little technical at first. We're just going to talk about the difference between popular and peer-reviewed sources and look at examples of how you're going to look at popular sources for your paper. So just to start off, simple question. What do you guys think the difference is between a popular source and a peer-reviewed source?
So I would think that a popular source would be something like more well known as far as a source, versus like a peer review is something that you would have to like find a specific site that actually talks about that, and different people are basically reviewing what somebody else said and giving their feedback and vice versa on that one. Where a popular source, they have documents like proof and stuff saying this is why, or this is where it's from, versus people are just reading that and kind of giving their own opinions, and everyone's reviewing each other's thoughts on it in a sense.
Great. No, yeah, you're getting right to the heart of it, Erica. Before I talk about the difference, one more question for you all, because this one is one I found, and I'll get into it in a second, but are .orgs and .govs peer-reviewed sources that you can trust, or are they technically popular sources?
I would say .org is less likely to trust as a peer-reviewed source as .gov is, mostly because organizations, which is .org, have a bias to whatever cause they're going towards. As far as what I think, government ones are there to inform, more so about laws or what the government's doing instead of picking a side.
Thanks, Taylor. Yeah, did anyone in high school were they ever told that .govs and .orgs are always trustworthy, or did you even talk about that? You're nodding your head, Jalen. What did you learn in high school about that?
I just learned that .gov and .org are better than like .coms because, or like Wikipedia is where people can like edit that and don't trust Wikipedia. That's just like what I've learned from high school.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is going to sound weird, but that's only common to be taught that in this state and maybe a couple others. I'm not sure why the professors here who go to conferences with high school teachers often complain about this, but the high school teachers don't ever change what they're doing. .orgs, .govs are not necessarily more credible than .coms, and Wikipedia can be perfectly credible. And we're going to look at that kind of stuff today. Not really sure why they teach you that .govs and .orgs are like peer-reviewed. They're not. So we're going to get into why that is and look at some examples. But just so that you know the difference, I wrote about this in next week, and the videos that you'll watch on this will break this down, so that should help, especially those who aren't in plus. But yeah, peer-reviewed is its own special category. To be peer-reviewed is actually a very rigorous process. So for instance, in the field that I'm in with English literature, and this works the same in all fields, just with slight differences. If I want to write something that gets published in a peer-reviewed journal, I have to first research that thing until I know almost everything about that particular subject I'm interested in writing about. Then I have to write the article, which is generally around 20 to 25 pages and has 30 to 40 other peer-reviewed sources cited in it. And then I submit that to the journal. The journal editor looks at it and assesses whether or not I'm a good enough writer to be published there. And if they think that I am, then they send that paper that I wrote without my name on it to 3 random professionals in the field who have reputations for being published in it already. All 3 of those editors have to approve of my paper or send me feedback for changing it before they will approve it. And then you get into this process of editing. Almost 100% of the time, you'll have to fix a few things that the other professionals see that you didn't do well enough. Once you're done with that process, then they'll publish your paper. So peer-reviewed means that you are an expert in the field who 3 other experts write off on as having something worthwhile to say, who didn't lie at all, who used the information as well as they could. That's the peer review process, and it's always blind to guarantee no bias. So the 3 people who my paper gets sent to, I'll never know who those 3 people are. They'll never know who I am. Well, until the paper gets published, then they'll see my name on it. But that's supposed to keep everyone's integrity intact, right? We don't want to, we're generally trying not to be biased, and we're trying not to even exclude ideas. I mean, a lot of stuff that gets published in peer-reviewed journals is pushing against the grain of what's already published. So even if you disagree with what the person in the article you're reviewing is saying, if they did a really good job making that argument, you still write off on it. So it's genuinely, I mean, a place where we're trying to amass really solid information. Popular sources are literally every other source. Wikipedia, mixed actually, .orgs, .coms, .govs, those are all considered popular sources because a few people get paid to write them, and nothing is blind peer-reviewed, nothing is fact-checked. That's the responsibility of the reader who goes onto that site to fact-check it themselves. So anything that's not fact-checked and not done that rigorously is considered a popular source. One example I have for you of And there's many examples of a .org site being disreputable. Was that about 5 years ago, there was a controversy when it was found out that the American Heart Association, which has a good reputation, had taken a couple $1 billion from the biggest meat manufacturer in the country. And mysteriously, the month later, a whole bunch of new red meat recipes that were healthy popped up on their site. This did not go unnoticed, and a bunch of doctors called out the hypocrisy there real quick. And the Heart Association changed. They don't have that up anymore. But they tried to get away with it. They tried to take a bunch of money, which was rumored to the people who run the association have pocketed a bunch of it. And they tried to post a whole bunch of recipes on their website that would have actually been unhealthy for the people reading the articles. There are certain red meats that are always unhealthy to eat if you have a heart condition that could lead to a heart attack. And they were recommending those people eat those meats. So .orgs and .com and .govs are just as susceptible to corruption as any other site. And on the flip side, .coms can be very reputable. We're going to look at one today. Some .com sites that have really long-lasting, high journalistic standards are generally taken to be almost as rigorous as peer review. So it really, you have to look into these things. You can see already how complicated it is, which is one of the reasons that the term fake news came out a few years back, right? How do you determine what's fake news and what's real news, what people's intentions are if they're trying to rip you off? It's far from simple. For your paper, you're only going to be required to use popular sources. So they're not going to be as long as peer-reviewed sources, and they're not going to be as rigorous. But what I'm going to ask you to do in your paper is defend your choice. So when you use the popular source, I want you to say, look, this publisher has a good reputation, this writer has a good reputation, you can trust what they say. So that's going to be on you to figure out if the publisher and the author that you cite have a good reputation and deserve to be in your paper or not. We're going to kind of crash course look at how you might do that. It's going to be pretty free. I'm not expecting you to spend a week doing this, but I want you to try to get used to trying to figure out how to do this. So what I want to do here is have us look at a popular source, and we're going to try to just live in class break down, do we trust it or not? We're going to kind of branch out. So I got that up. Let me go ahead and screen share it with you. So here we go. We're looking at the Black Lives Matter movement and stuff, right? This article isn't exactly about MLK, but I think it serves as a really great example of what you guys are going to be doing. So we have this website called Quillette. Maybe say you've Googled stuff and you've been like, this sounds like an interesting article. The article is called Racist Police Violence Reconsidered by the author John McWhorter. Okay. You read the article, let's say that you like it and you want to use it. And I'll try to read the article here in a few minutes, but let's just say that you liked this article and you want to use it. So now you're going to go, okay, how can I defend my choice to use this in my paper? How do I know I can trust these people? Well, I think the first thing we want to do is look at the publisher. So let's go ahead, and we're on Quillette's website. We'll go ahead and look at the About button and see who is Quillette, right? What do they say they are? So we look here on their website, we can read what they say. They claim that Quillette is a platform for free thought. We respect ideas, even dangerous ones. We also believe that free expression and the free exchange of ideas help human societies flourish and progress. Quillette aims to provide a platform for this exchange. Okay, fine, you exchange ideas. All publishers do that. That's not very informative, right? So we don't really have much evidence there. But the next part, who are we? Okay, well, we can actually see who we're dealing with now, right? Claire Lehman, Jamie Palmer, Jonathan Kay, Toby Young, and Colin Wright. And it has their positions and their email addresses. One thing you want to keep in mind is that the website, if they do not have a title next to the person, like PhD in or MA in or whatever next to their name, that's usually not a good sign, because they're not telling you what this person knows. And if they also don't have any links to information about these people, that's also usually a bad sign. Most publishers who have really good information that you want to use are going to be completely open about who their publishers, who the people who run the magazine are, and what their credentials are. So if you find a list like this and they're hiding credentials from you, generally a bad sign. But not always a doom, you know? So let's go ahead and just Google some of these people and see what happens, right? How else are we gonna find out about them? So we'll go ahead and look at the first person, Claire Lehman. Pop her into the Google machine. Did you guys track with me into that Google, or are you still on the last page?
We're in the Google.
Okay, perfect. So Claire Lehman, okay, journalist. Let's go look at her reputation. We can look at a little Wikipedia on her. There's an Instagram. There's not a whole lot here. Let's see what it says about her. Personal life. She's the daughter of a teacher. Okay, she graduated with a bachelor's degree in psychology from University of Adelaide. So she has a bachelor's degree. Then she went on to do her master's in psychology, but she dropped out and never finished. Okay, so she has a bachelor's degree, which is not really a great qualification to be a journalist. Maybe if she had a bachelor's in journalism, we'd trust her more. It's a little interesting. Well, let's read on and see what it says about her. It says that she founded the online magazine Quillette 5 years ago, okay. And she's had good success. Okay, there's not really much written about her here. It says that she's regarded as one of the co-leaders of the intellectual dark web. Okay, have you guys ever heard of that phrase before? And if so, what's it associated with? What's the intellectual dark web?
I've got no idea.
No idea? Okay. Well, the intellectual dark web is usually a phrase that's kind of around very, very right-wing thinkers who rile people up. They usually don't have a very good reputation. Okay, so how do we fact check any of this? On Wikipedia, you actually can fact check everything that a person puts in a Wikipedia article. There's references down at the bottom and little footnotes to each reference. So whenever they claim something, if there's no footnote, no reference, probably don't trust it. If there is a reference, you can simply click on the reference and see if it's true or not. So Wikipedia does cite they ask you to cite everything that you say in the Wikipedia entry. So you can actually go through and see how much of it's true. That takes some time, but you can do that. This particular page, you might notice, really bad omen, has this very rare that you'll see on Wikipedia disclaimer at the top of the article. This article may contain an excessive number of citations. Not good. Please consider removing references to unnecessary or disreputable sources, merging citations where possible. So someone who works for Wikipedia saw this article, saw that there were too many references, and also flagged it for using disreputable ones. So that's not good. That's usually a sign that whoever it is who has this page on them has been interfering with their Wikipedia page. It's a bad sign when you're interfering with your Wikipedia page. So we can go ahead and go through and do this with all of the people on Quillette. Spoiler alert, none of them have very good reputations. They're all very similar to that editor-in-chief. So not a great sign, right? When the people running the magazine have bad reputations. Let's go ahead and just double check, and we can, I know this is messy, but we can start just simply Googling what is the reputation of Quillette? There are plenty of websites out there where they make it their job to assess journalists. Website to website, it's hard to say how correct they are. But if you look at 4 or 5 of these websites in a row and they all say the same thing, you can rest assured that public opinion on that journal is what they say it is. So Politico is actually a pretty decent website. It's a .com, but they do a really good job of taking critical looks at journalists. That's their thing, political journalists. You can read this article. This article states that the gal who started Quillette probably doesn't have what it takes to be a good journalist. She lies. That's what they claim. But we can also go into fact-checking websites like this media bias fact check and just get a rough idea of what reviewers say about what this magazine is. So according to them, this magazine is generally almost extreme far right. So you almost only get far right leaning ideas politically. And then it has a little blurb about who they are with a list of questionable sources. So they've taken the time to go through Quillette's articles, find and show us when they used questionable sources, right? And you can go ahead and read through the rest about about their breakdown of this particular magazine. You can go through and look at other fact-checking websites. Slate's usually generally fine. All Sides is usually generally fine. They also paint this magazine as far right. So you get the idea that consensus is that you might want to be careful about trusting this magazine and that it leans far right. Just because something leans far right or far left doesn't mean it's bad, but you need to know that it leans that way, right? So say you're writing an article to people who disagree with you and you're a far right person. If you only use far right sources, they're never going to listen to you. You're going to have to balance it out with some sources that are more centrist or left side, right? So I've done a lot so far, just kind of general how to start looking through popular sources. I want to take a quick break there. What kind of questions or comments do you guys have right now? Stop that share for a second.
So should we fact check it every time we read like an article like that? Should we fact check it every time? Or is it just like a bonus, I guess? I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah, for the paper that you're writing, right, I'm asking you to use 2 sources. One needs to be on one side of the argument and one on the other. For the 2 sources you use in your paper, I'm going to ask you to prove in your paper that the source is worth listening to. So you're going to need to do, with the 2 that you choose, you're going to need to do some exploring and find out, are they trustworthy, and make a case for why they are. If you find that almost everyone doesn't think they're trustworthy, then don't use them in your paper. It's a bad source then. I know this is tricky, but this is the actual hard work that it is to figure out what's fake and what's real news. It's a messy process. You have to trust fact checkers who claim that they're doing it disinterestedly, which maybe they are, maybe they aren't. So it's healthy to look at multiple fact checkers to see if they all agree or not. You're gonna need to look into the reputation of the author, which is what we're about to do. So you need to build a small case for both of the interlocutors you use that I should trust them, right? That anyone reading what you wrote should trust them. So let's go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Taylor.
So the argument that we're trying to make is that BLK would be for or against the Black Lives Matter, right? Okay, and so do the articles have to be directly like on that? Like, for instance, in the article it says that BLK would or BLK wouldn't. Or like, for instance, can we take an article that talks about the Black Lives Movement and then try and like show the ideas that BLK has MLK, sorry,
You're okay.
has, and why he would oppose that kind of makeup.
That's a great question. You're totally welcome to use sources that don't mention MLK. You don't have to use those. You're totally welcome to use sources about MLK that don't mention Black Lives Matter. That's up to you. But it does need to be clear that two of the sources that you use disagree with each other on this issue in some way. Cool. I'm gonna pop back into Colette here. So now we're gonna complicate things a little bit, actually. If we go back to the article, you look at this author, John McWhorter. I'll tell you right now, this is not a reputable publication, but John McWhorter is a stellar peer-reviewed public figure. He wrote this book that they teach in college for linguistics almost all around the country called Our Magnificent Bastard Tongue. It's a great book. He's written a bunch of other books that are very well received by academics. He's peer-reviewed dozens of papers. He writes for reputable magazines. If that's the case, why the heck would he publish something this year in a magazine that has a bad reputation? Let's unpack that a little bit, because I think it would be very worthwhile to use this article even though the publisher has a bad reputation, which is a weird, interesting thing, but that's how it goes sometimes. So if you find a really well-written article written in a place that has a bad reputation, you should ask why, or if you get into any of these kind of situations. So let's go ahead and look up John McWhorter real quick. So we can go ahead. First thing here I'd like to draw your attention to is he's on the staff of Columbia University. He's a Columbia University linguistics professor. And by looking on their website, we can see all of his credentials. He's got a PhD in linguistics. He's a hired associate professor. And he has all of these peer-reviewed books published. This is a serious writer, a serious academic with a good reputation. If we go on to the library database and look up peer-reviewed articles, we'll find a bunch of his. And you'll notice here in the description, if you read near the bottom, that he's a regular writer for newspapers like the New Republic and the Atlantic. Have you guys heard of the Atlantic? I might have even had you read something from that magazine. Go ahead and look at there. So this is the Atlantic. It's a journal here. This is the journal that he usually publishes in. It's a popular journal, right? So let's go ahead and look into who they are real quick. So we go down to the bottom, it's where things often are, and we just read about who is the Atlantic. If you go into our history, we can find exactly who they say they are. And this is much more extensive than Quillette's, right? They even make moves here to connect themselves to people like Emerson. Let me find that real quick. Yeah, the where we come from part. They say that when the founders of the Atlantic gathered in Boston in the spring of 1857, so this magazine's been around since 1857. They wanted to create a magazine that would be indispensable for the kind of reader who was deeply engaged with the most consequential issues of the day. The men and women who created this magazine had an overarching prophetic vision. They were fierce opponents of slavery, but they were also moved to overcome what they saw as the limits of partisanship, believing that free exchange of ideas across ideological lines was crucial to the American experiment. I said back then when they started, the people who signed on to the charter of the magazine were Ralph Waldo Emerson, Herman Melville, Harriet Beecher Stowe, and Nathaniel Hawthorne. Those are 4 of the 10 most recognizable English writers ever. We had 4 of them signing off on this magazine, so they have really strong roots. If you go ahead and you go back and look at who the staff is, you'll notice that the staff for this website, they list who the staff is and they have links to each person's biography. Good sign, right? When you click on each of these links, you're going to find all of their credentials listed, and each of these people have really good credentials in research and really, really good records in journalism where they haven't lied to people before. So that's great. You want to look into those. You'll also find when you look on to the Politico summaries of is the Atlantic trustworthy or not, almost every single one of those is going to say that the Atlantic has an almost perfect record of being of integrity with the sources that they use and with the information that they publish. And you'll also find that they are actually centrist left. So McWhorter spends most of his time publishing in left-leaning publications that have good reputations. So that takes us back to that question I asked you a minute ago. Why do you think McWhorter, who has such a well-revered career and who usually publishes in more left-leaning magazines, would publish an article in a heavily right-leaning magazine that has no good reputation at all? Doesn't make much sense, right? You want to use his article, but why the heck would he publish it here? If you're going to say you should listen to this article, you're going to have to kind of make a case for why we should trust anything from Quillette when they have such a bad reputation. So I'm going to go ahead and read the article out loud real quick. It's really short. And then I want to talk about how you might justify using this article even though it's published in a place with a bad reputation. This is the kind of work that goes into assessing a popular source. Before I do that real quick, I know I just covered a lot again. Any questions or comments on what we've been doing? I'm really hoping this is all helpful to you. I'm just trying to unpack kind of what you can expect to do if you use a popular source. How do you prove that I should trust you? This is the kind of stuff. So this is what McWhorter writes. I'll just read it out loud quickly. Tony Timpa was 32 years old when he died at the hands of Dallas police in August 2016. He suffered from mental health difficulties and was unarmed. He wasn't resisting arrest. He had called the cops from a parking lot while intoxicated because he thought he might be a danger to himself. By the time law enforcement arrived, he had already been handcuffed by the security guards of a store nearby. Even so, the police officers made him lie face down on the grass, and one of them pressed a knee into his back. He remained in this position for 13 minutes until he suffocated. During the harrowing recording of his final moments, he can be heard pleading for his life. This has happened this summer. A grand jury indictment of the officers was overturned. So we open up with the classic story, an unarmed black man dying because of the police, and the police don't have any repercussions for it. Not what you expect out of a right-wing magazine, right? Why the heck is a right-wing magazine publishing this? Well, we'll unpack that. Not many people have seen this video, however, and that may have something to do with the fact that Timpa was actually white, not a black guy. During the protests and agonizing discussions about police brutality, we have followed the death of George Floyd under remarkably similar circumstances. It is too seldom acknowledged that white men are regularly killed by cops as well, and that occasionally the cops responsible are black. As it happens, one of the Dallas police officers at the scene of Timpa's death was an African American. There seem to be widespread assumptions that, under similar circumstances, white cops kill black people but not white people, and that this disparity is either a product of naked racism or underlying racist bias that's emerged under pressure. Plenty of evidence indicates, however, that racism is less important to understanding police behavior than is commonly supposed. Timpa was, of course, just one case and might be dismissed as an anomaly. On the other hand, we are told that what happened to George Floyd is what happens to black people all the time. But because the killing of black suspects by white police officers receives more media attention and elicits more outrage, Such instances leave us vulnerable to the availability heuristic, a cognitive bias that leads us to form judgments about the prevalence and phenomena based on the readiness with which we recall examples. Had Tony Timpa been black, we would all likely know his name by now. I don't have time to read this whole article, so I'm going to summarize the rest of it to you, because I want to get to the point of what we're doing with the popular sources here. McWhorter is a black man. He's a well-received intellectual. He publishes in a left-leaning magazine all the time, and he publishes about Black Lives Matter stuff, often defending it or criticizing its weaknesses because he wants it to be stronger. However, in this article he publishes in a right-wing magazine with a bad reputation, he argues that we're not talking about all of the white people who die at the hands of the police. And he argues that we're overemphasizing the racism of the police. He does this by looking at statistics on poverty. And he notes that between white and black people who are unarmed killed by the police, the numbers statistically are equal. If you are poor and white, or if you are poor and black, there is the same percentage that you will die by police hands when you're unarmed. If you have money and you're white and money and you're black, there's a much higher chance you'll die if you're black than if you're white. But he's very interested in this other data. Why is it that the cops killed poor people who are unarmed at such a high rate? That's his question. And he ends the article by noting that because of the history of America, poverty in black communities is 3 times higher than in white communities. So it's easy to see why we relate this problem only to black people. And he just raises a can of worms, right? Why are there so many more black people in poverty than white people? Why do the police kill white people in such higher numbers? But this right-wing magazine felt that they would publish this because he actually pushes back against the idea that all cops are just racist. So why do you think, if that all made sense to you, why do you think McWhorter chose knowingly to publish this article in this magazine? Why not publish it in The Atlantic?
Would it have to do with the political content of the article? For instance, he's publishing it in a right-wing magazine because the left-wing magazine would be more focused on why officers are racist against black people, if that made sense. Whereas in like a right-wing would be like, oh, it's just the same for white people. It's like the audience is different. The audience he's trying to reach is different.
Thanks, Taylor. Well, you're totally onto it with the audience thing. However, The Atlantic does regularly publish articles about the weaknesses of Black Lives Matter, and McWhorter's wrote 3 of them. So they're very open to that. The Atlantic only publishes a slightly more left than right-leaning articles, but they're actually very fair. So you're right, though, with the audience. Why would he publish this article to an audience of people who want a magazine with a bad reputation that's very right-wing? Any other ideas on why he might have chosen to do this? The Atlantic would have published this.
So I have a quick question. So when you say like left wing and right wing, like, I guess for me I'm a little confused. So like, for this article that we're talking about, would the right wing be like they're more towards it's only because the cops are racist deal, where the left wing is kind of viewing both sides of the fact, as like the information in his article saying that it's not only the black lives that are dying from the cops, it's just the ones that get published more because people make more of a fuss over it versus when a cop kills a person of another color or the same or white, basically. Is that what you mean by white, right, and left wing, kind of, as it pertains to this article?
Good, yeah, good question. So I think you probably all are familiar with those terms, right and left wing, right? Like one is more conservative, the other more liberal. We associate it with our political parties that way. It's kind of how it's tied to our country. So you would probably assume, although not always true, that a right-leaning person probably doesn't think Black Lives Matter has any validity, but a left-leaning person does. It's on that spectrum with Black Lives Matter. So the Atlantic, while slightly left-wing leaning, will publish articles from either side. But the Quillette, the magazine that we're looking at, it's extreme far right, like to the point where they almost never publish anything that's positive about Black Lives Matter, whereas like the Atlantic publishes both sides. If you found an extreme far left magazine, they probably would never publish anything against Black Lives Matter. So there's a spectrum there, if that makes sense. McWhorter generally publishes in centrist stuff, so stuff where most people trust it because they're trying to get to the truth. But all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he publishes in a far-right magazine. And I think, Taylor, you were right onto it with audience. If McWhorter wants to actually find the truth, and he's a critic of Black Lives Matter while he also participates in it, and he wants to convince people who completely disagree with him that there is some validity in Black Lives Matter, it would make sense that he would publish an article that's friendly on the face to people on the right wing, but that nuances the argument, right? Because look, he's saying, look, if you have money, statistically, Black people are dying at a higher rate than white people to the police. But if you're poor, white and Black people alike are getting killed the same by police when they're unarmed. So he hasn't made a strong argument for Black Lives Matter, but he's thrown in a few details and statistics about it that readers of the Quillette would probably have never listened to. Does that make sense? He's come at this in a way that's friendly to those far-right readers, while still pushing them in a direction what he thinks is towards the truth. So if you were going to use this popular source in your paper because you really like the article, how might you prove that it's worth listening to even though it comes from a magazine with a bad reputation?
I think you would try to show the writer's reputation more, lean towards that, showing he's had all this other articles published and everything, and that perhaps the only reason, or one of the reasons he posted to a non-reputable website is for the fact to maybe point out some of the central ideas to them to see if he can get anybody's information or reactions as far as like to open their mind to the possibilities that they're not 100% correct in their thoughts, but he's not judging them. He's just trying to show them, hey, if you didn't know this, like, this is something you might want to consider before you're saying that you're all towards this.
Good, yeah, that's exactly right. So as you guys write your paper, they'll be asking you to do just that. When you find the source, look to see what the source's reputation is, look to see what the author's reputation is. If it's a bad reputation from the author and a bad reputation from the source, don't use it. If it's a good reputation from the author and a good reputation from the source, use it and show us that. If you get into a situation, which actually happens a lot, where the author has a good reputation but the source is questionable, you might be able to find a way to explain to your reader, look, the source has a bad reputation, but that's okay. You know, you can explain it like this Quillette piece. So as you're assessing your popular sources, this is just kind of the dirty work that happens, and I just want you to take your best stab at it. You're not going to be perfect at it. It's really hard to do, but I just wanted you guys to see kind of what it looks like to do that.
It's kind of a dumb question, but just kind of out of the logic of it. If the writer has a bad credit, but the source has a good credit, you still probably shouldn't use it, right?
No, that's not necessarily true either, because the writer could be reformed. I mean, they could be now writing well. But you're going to have to then on the flip side argue that, hey, this writer had a bad reputation, but they're publishing here, and the publication checked their facts, and I checked their facts, and it's legit. So you can argue that too.